Hi, everyone. I'm Ty Collins, and welcome to the latest edition of the Lawrence University Career Center podcast, where every month we check in with a Lawrence alumni to find out what's going on with their lives and their careers after leaving Lawrence. And today we're joined by Tod Gimbel from the Lawrence class of 1981, where Tod studied government and history. He would later earn his JD from Marquette Law School and go on to hold a variety of roles in the areas of public affairs, advocacy, consulting, and sustainability. Tod has worked for a number of well-known companies, including Herbalife Nutrition, Citi, Levi's, Kraft Foods, Altria, and Miller Brewing. He also ran a boutique Public Affairs Consultancy in Asia, representing large corporate clients, NGOs, and Trade Associations. He's currently involved with several ongoing ventures, including as a strategic advisor with Mushroom Media, a program developer with the Spaceship Academy, and he has several public affairs and ESG roles with Enliven Advisory, the Equanimity Group, Lava, and ESG Launchpad, and is on the board of directors with the Lawrence University Alumni Association. Clearly an extremely busy man. Thank you, Tod, for making some time for us today.
Thanks, Ty. It's really good to be here. I'm really excited to be talking to you and to Laurentians, current, present, and past.
Well, thank you. In looking at your LinkedIn profile, looking at your work history, I can't help but notice the letters ESG appearing several times. Can you tell us what that means, what that is?
Sure. Well, most of my career has been in public affairs area, which really is engaging with stakeholders external to your organization, like to your company. And that's a very broad category. And within the last maybe 5 to 10 years, companies and the public and NGOs and others have become much more interested in what organizations are doing beyond just making money and profits, and what they're doing for the world, and what they're doing that's good. So ESG stands for, the E stands for environment, the S stands for social, and the G stands for governance. So together, they are 3 big categories and buckets of things that organizations can, should, and most now do to really round off their ability to be a better citizens of the world and better stewards of all the things we're trying to, save here in the world as we run out of resources and as we run out of, a lot of things that we're used to, and as we have so many issues in the social area about injustice and et cetera, et cetera. So it's really the next stage of what organizations need to do to be well-respected, well-rounded, and good citizens.
In your role specifically with that, how do you get involved with that in the day-to-day activities of what you do?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I kind of backed into it. A number of years ago, when I was living in Singapore, I was the head of corporate affairs for Levi's in Asia. And Levi's is a company that has been ahead of the curve on social issues and environmental issues for a very long time. In fact, they were the first company that had basically for all of their factories that they don't own, but that they manufacture at, they put together a code of conduct that the factories had to follow, whether it be fair wages, equity, so that we could move the apparel industry beyond some of the old stories you heard about underage labor and terrible, unsafe conditions, et cetera. And Levi's was also doing a lot of work in the area of sustainable cotton. Jeans are made out of cotton. Cotton is another agricultural industry where there was a lot of bad stuff going on, child labor. And then the cotton would get mingled. And when you bought it, you didn't know whether it came from a good source or a bad source. Long story short, I started to integrate that type of discussion and the good citizenship of Levi's into my work as a public affairs person, talking to external people. And it really resonated. Government people, NGOs, academics, they love to hear the good stories of what corporations are doing, because mostly you hear the bad stories. So later on, fast forward a number of years, I was working for Herbalife Nutrition. Again, I just moved back to the U.S. from 13 years in Asia, and I was head of government relations for Herbalife for the whole world. And my boss came in one day and said, "Hey, you've done a lot of work in the kind of sustainability space indirectly. We want to put together a program here at Herbalife. Can you jump in and help us out?" And I thought it was going to be like a part-time gig, and it ended up being bigger than what I was doing in my real job. And for 3 years, I helped Herbalife to establish their ESG program. So all of the things they were doing in the environmental, social, and governance area, we we took inventory and said, okay, what are we doing, already? Because everybody, whether you have a program or not, is doing something in this space. So we decided, and took inventory of what they're doing in the space. What does that mean? And where do we want to go? And we set goals. And Herbalife went from bottom of the pack of their industry in this space to top third in the period of a couple of years. And I was very engaged in making that happen. And I found it very satisfying to be doing that type of work that really shows kind of an effect on the world and the planet in a positive way. I ran with it.
This kind of work, I think, is very appealing to Lawrence students who are interested in making a mark on the world and doing social good. I want to stick with ESG for a minute because there is some criticism of it, and I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on it. One of which is this idea of greenwashing. When an organization spends a great deal of time and money marketing itself as environmentally friendly or socially friendly, but they're not really doing the good that they say they're doing. How would someone know if an organization is disclosing the information related to their sustainability practices and truly living up to its commitments in this area?
And that's a great question. And greenwashing is a real thing. I mean, there's some very big, reputable companies that have gotten in a lot of trouble for greenwashing. Now, greenwashing can be as simple as misstating something or saying, hey, we have no carbon, our carbon footprint is zero. And in reality, it really isn't. They haven't really calculated it right. And sometimes you can get in trouble for greenwashing, unintentionally, because these companies are usually trying to do the right thing. So one of the things that I've been doing in my consulting work and also in this group that I'm with that's called the Spaceship Academy and ESG Launchpad, we do training in the ESG space. And one of the things we train on is how to avoid greenwashing. And the real basic principle of how to avoid greenwashing is to be very transparent, to document everything you do and you've done, and to make sure that before you hand anything over to your public relations department or make any public statements, that you've really vetted it and make sure that it's true. It's not that hard to avoid it. And you also have to make sure that when you're publicizing, so to speak, your accomplishments, that you don't exaggerate those accomplishments, that you stick to your guns of, look, if we've cut our energy use by 40% and moved to 20% renewable energy from fossil fuels, that's great. But be able to prove that before you start talking about it. And that's the easiest way to avoid greenwashing. But it's a real thing. And there are lots of other aspects to it. A lot of companies buy carbon offsets. So if you can't reduce your carbon footprint, like an airline or something, there's a way you can buy an offset and say, okay, for X number of dollars, we'll plant 100,000 trees. And up until recently, there hasn't been much guidance or regulation around that stuff. So, someone may be planting those same 100,000 trees 10 times, and trying to take credit for it. So there's a lot of really research you need to do and validation that you need to do before you talk about what you're doing in this space.
Let me stick with this maybe a little bit for one last question, because I do think it's something Lawrence students, especially with the business mind, might want to look at for a career. The other objection, I think, to this kind of thing, or the criticism of ESG, probably falls more in the investment space and the way financial planners, investment companies are investing the money of their clients. Is they might invest only in companies who claim they have a great focus on ESG, which means they could be ignoring companies such as defense contractors and oil companies who are considered, quote unquote, socially bad, even though these industries historically have given their investors pretty strong returns. And the criticism is, these ESG funds are focusing more on political objectives than, getting strong returns for their investors. What do you say to that?
Well, so as a long-term government relations public affairs guy, everything's political. I'll tell you that on the top. In the U.S. in particular, there's been a movement primarily from the right side of the aisle, the MAGA type folks and others. To your point, ESG isn't a thing that should be considered for investors. Companies shouldn't be considering it, blah, blah, blah. The fact is that there is a linkage to profitability and success in companies and doing things in the ESG space. I don't care how altruistic a company is. If they're a public company or even a private company that's for profit, they're not going to do anything that doesn't ultimately help them. So if you change your buildings over from coal-fired electricity to solar, there's an investment, but there's also a payoff. So the fact of the matter is that whether you call it ESG, whether you call it just doing good for the planet, or whether you call it just good business, the principles that go behind ESG are going to happen more, and they're happening more and more. And they are happening to, in all organizations, regardless of their historical, and traditional thinking about it. ESG started really before it even was a thing. There were funds that avoided tobacco and gun manufacturers and stuff like that. And, or they avoided investing in things that had a tie into apartheid in South Africa back in the day. That's kind of how this all came together. But it just started to become more and more of a thing as time developed and as issues developed and as knowledge of, being socially impactful can be a profitable thing. Look at products you see on the shelf now. In maybe even 10 years ago, people wouldn't pay a penny more for a good for the earth product than they would for their favorite product that they've always bought. Now they will. And now young people like Laurentians and others, they don't want to go to work for a company that doesn't have a social purpose, that isn't doing well. And companies are having a hard time keeping employees because they don't want to work for a place that doesn't have kind of an ethos beyond just profit.
And that's a good moving on point to my next question. And that would be, we do have this new business major at Lawrence, yet even those who are in this program still do have that desire to do social good and work for organizations, whether it's ESG or some other, let's make an impact positively on the world. For students who do want to kind of go in that direction, what's your advice for them now? What are some things they could be doing while they're still students?
My advice is, when you pick your career path, it's going to take a bunch of twists and turns. But if you follow kind of your heart of doing things you want to do and you believe in, it's going to work out well for you. So, for example, if you really want to make an impact on the world, you can make an impact on the world by working for an NGO, okay, like Greenpeace or WWF or any of these organizations. It's a good way to learn. You can also make an impact and make money by going to work for a company that has values aligned to your values. So when you're looking at where you want to interview, if you've got 3 possibilities out there, do the research, look at their sustainability report, see what they're doing, see where they're going in the space that you care about, and make your decisions based on that kind of research and that kind of information. Or go somewhere and then try to make your mark from within. Go to a place and try to get, like, all of this stuff, all of this doing good took a lot of convincing of MBAs and CEOs and chief financial officers who all they care about is profit. The reason they're doing all this good stuff is someone was able to convince them that it isn't bad for the big picture of their company to do these things. And with a Lawrence education and the ability to talk and reason and argue and discuss, use those skills to bring the change about wherever you decide to go.
So I want to talk a bit more about your career now. As people heard in the intro, you're involved with a lot of different organizations. You could be like most people and work for one company. Why do you do so many things, and why are you involved with so much? And I just wonder if the famous Lawrence Busy kind of got you started on that road.
Well, that's really an interesting question. So I did go on the straight path for a long time. I'm a late career guy. When I got out of Lawrence, I went to law school, practiced law for a couple of years, realized that was not my calling, was not my passion. And from then on, I was really working in big companies for, 20, 30 plus years in different roles. But I also, through that period of time, while I was kind of a public affairs, corporate affairs guy, I did government relations in DC. I did it in the US states. I got very fortunate to get an opportunity to go over to Asia, where I went for 3 years when I was working for Kraft Foods to help develop their public affairs department in Asia. And they told me to come home. And I said, I'm not coming home. And I stayed for 10 more years and worked for Levi's and Citibank and Herbalife and a couple others along the way, because that type of work was, even though I was working for one company each of these times, it was always varied. I mean, one day I'd have an issue in Vietnam that I'd have to go deal with. The next day I'd be in Indonesia. And it was fascinating to me to do all these different things and to be working for one client, basically, in a lot of different spaces across many countries, cultures, types of governments. And when I came back here and left Herbalife about a little less than 2 years ago, I said, you know what? First of all, I don't think I want another corporate gig. I've been there, done that for 30 years. Second of all, I'm getting older and it's hard to get a corporate gig when you're in your 60s. And I have this great network of people I've met and worked with over the years. So I jumped into a small consulting firm that works with startups, and I'm starting to establish a public affairs and ESG practice there, because startups don't have the money to bring in high-level executives in these spaces until they get much bigger, so they can get help in these spaces much earlier in their history. And then I also really kind of caught on to the idea of being able to educate and kind of transfer some of my knowledge. So I'm now working with this group that does ESG education. And we do it in a very fun, informative, participatory way. So we're doing a big training project right now for about 300 people who work in the operations area of a big bank in Singapore that's big in Asia, about green buildings, green spaces, how they can, in their jobs, bring in technology and materials and things that are much more circular. And it's just, for me, I love people, and it's just fascinating to be engaged that way. So that's why I've got a lot of irons in the fire. And because of my ability now to have global reach, because I've lived, and worked in global roles, I've got a couple things going in Singapore, a couple things going in Europe, a couple things going in the US. And it's just variety and excitement for me that keeps me engaged and wanting to get up every day and work.
Do you work from home exclusively then, or most of the time?
Yeah, so I don't have an office. I do travel. I like to be face-to-face with people. I mean, believe me, after COVID, I obviously learned to work from home like everyone else did. The nice thing is that whole experience has allowed me to have these roles and these jobs and these gigs that are all like the Singapore gig I'm doing right now. We're doing these live trainings. They start at like 11 o'clock at night for me, because that's and I had to do calls at 3 a.m. But you know what? As much as I'd love to be sitting with these people, it's amazing to be able to be with people in 7 or 10 countries at one time and imparting good information and having good discussions with them from, sitting here in my office in my house.
At Lawrence, you studied political science and history. And one of the things about Lawrence is that your major does not need to dictate your career. You're a great example of that. Can you talk about how those two subjects, political science and history, have influenced your career path in business, and more generally, how you think your Lawrence education provided you with the skills, tools, confidence to have the diverse career that you have had with all these twists and turns?
It's funny because I always say, I was a history and government major, but yet I probably took as many classes in other subjects outside of my major. I don't even consider myself like as having had a major in a weird kind of way. Like if you went to like a big state school and you were like majoring in business or majoring in accounting, that's what you're majoring in. You're going to be an accountant. Okay. The beauty of Lawrence was that, yes, I had some great government and political science classes with some amazing professors, Professor Pavoldi and Professor Aidenwall and Ha and Longley. And there were some great, I learned a lot from those guys. And in history, there was Professor Cheney and Bruning. There were some amazing professors there. But I took English classes. I took tutorials where we'd read the French philosophers with a French teacher. I don't even speak French, but we did it in English. I took some theater classes. The beauty of the liberal arts education, and Lawrence in particular, is you can do whatever you want to do. And at the end of the day, you come out the back door as a graduate with this foundational ability to adapt and to proactively engage in a lot of different things. So just because I was a government major, I didn't get into public affairs till after I was practicing law for a while, which really, the government major doesn't really affect my ability to practice law. But the ability to learn to take things in and to write essays instead of multiple choice question tests, to assimilate stuff, to make arguments, to understand theories and philosophies. That's really what I learned at Lawrence that allowed me to pivot in 100 different directions throughout the last, 40 years. I really do, and this is not just because I'm talking to you and you're in the Lawrence Career Center, I do attribute a lot of my success in my career to my Lawrence education. I value it. I spent 2 terms in London. I had a great time in Appleton as well. It really kind of set me up to be able to go out in the world with confidence, with knowledge, and with kind of the ability to flex and move in 100 different directions without stressing out and without freaking out. Oh my God, I'm an accountant. I can't do this. I trained to be, I walked out of Lawrence thinking I could do anything. And you know what? To a certain extent, I could. So the major didn't matter as much to me. I think the idea of when you're at Lawrence, you should dive into as much as you can, take classes and things that you never thought you'd be interested in, focus on what you're interested in, do extracurricular things. All of that adds up to enabling you to be your best self when you get out in the world and have to make a living.
You remain involved with Lawrence as a member of the board of directors on the Lawrence University Alumni Association. It's been 40 years since you were a student. Why do you stay involved with Lawrence?
When I left school, I'd come back to my reunions. I have a bunch of good Lawrence friends still. And when I moved to Asia, I kind of lost track. I mean, I still see what was going on. And when I moved back, a classmate of mine called me one day and said, "Hey, would you like to get involved back in Lawrence?" And I said, I hadn't thought about that, but sure, I'd love to. And that was a couple of years ago. And I took on the commitment of being on the alumni board. It's a good thing for me. I live in California now, and my family's in Milwaukee. So a couple times a year I get out there. I think it was just last year because I joined during COVID. Last year was my first time back on campus in probably 30 years or 25 years. And it all came back to me. I mean, I loved it. And the campus, even though you got a lot of new stuff there, the old stuff's still there. So it's just, I'm thrilled that I took that on because I've reconnected with some people that I used to know. And I've met so many people from, who've come after me, young people who've been out of school for maybe 10 years. And it's been a great connection for me back to my roots that really got me started in my career. So I'm thrilled to do it. It's not a huge time commitment, but it is a really satisfactory experience for me.
So earlier we discussed some specific advice you'd give to the business students on some ESG issues and social good issues. In general, in terms of Tod's best advice for maybe upcoming graduates and then those who are a little bit behind that, what's Tod's best advice for those students?
So my best advice is while you're at school, throw yourself into the 360 degrees of being in college at Lawrence. Take classes that you're interested in. Take a few that you don't think you might be interested in, but maybe you will become interested in them. Do extracurricular activities. I played sports at Lawrence. I was on the soccer team. I'm not great. I wouldn't have gotten any, any chance to play anywhere else, but I got to play varsity soccer at a Division III school. That was fun. Do that kind of stuff. I like to look at it as remember that you're there to learn how to learn. And when you learn how to learn, then you learn how to live and you learn how to survive and how to make a living for yourself. And you get such a broad experience at Lawrence that you then can go in any direction that you want to go in. And you should be fearless when you leave there that you are ready for the world. It's going to take you a little while. You're going to stumble. But again, like me, you're going to start in one direction and you may take a left, you may take a right, but roll with that because you're going to be prepared after 4 years of Lawrence.
Great advice. And, we were talking about all the things that you're involved in. Now you're going to be following my lead and starting a podcast, right? So what's that going to be about?
One thing that I realized is, as you get older, it's harder to stay in shape. It's harder to stay fit. It's harder to eat right. I was traveling a lot for years and, I was in these great countries that have amazing food and it probably wasn't the best for my health and my wellness. About 3 years ago, I started working out with a trainer here in LA. And we just hit it off. He's 15 years younger than me, but he's 50, super nice guy. We had this great banter and we thought, there really isn't much information out there for older active people, how they can kind of live healthier, lifestyles while still having fun. We're not like going to say go vegan or stop drinking or stop partying. What we're doing is we're talking about how can you kind of stay fit? How can you commit to yourself, to your wellness, to your health? And how does that change over time? Like the things I need to do now as a 64-year-old guy are very different than when I was at Lawrence and I basically stayed in shape just because I was active. You have to be more thoughtful now. So we're doing this podcast where we talk about different ways that as you age, you can take care of yourself, your body, your health, your diet. And we bring on guests. I was telling you earlier, we had my 88-year-old dad on last week. He still practices law in Milwaukee. He's 88 years old. And he was an athlete when he was younger, but later on, now he still goes to a trainer to help keep his balance and some of the things. So it's called The Ageless Wonders, theagelesswonders.com. We haven't really launched. We've got about 8 or 9 episodes in the bag, and we're gonna try to launch right around Christmas time. So it'd be great if everyone could tune in. It's not maybe so much for the younger Laurentians, but for all you alumni.
Well, that too. I mean, I'm sure the general wellness stuff you're going to have on there will be good for anybody, right?
Yeah, that's true. Look, good habits. It's all about habits. And that's the thing about Lawrence. You're developing study habits, you're developing learning habits, you're developing debate and discussion habits. And the more those things become ingrained in you, the better you're going to do in your life, whether it be career-wise, whether it be health-wise and lifestyle-wise.
All right. We'll put a link to your website and your LinkedIn profile in the description for this podcast, so folks can check both of those out. Tod Gimbel from the Lawrence class of 1981. Thank you for joining us on the Lawrence University Career Center podcast.
Thanks, Ty. It's been a privilege.